Welcome to This Feels Familiar. I'm your host, Minaa B. I'm a therapist, author, and creator of the Siblinghood Theory. And this show explores the themes of belonging, conflict, and the relational patterns shaping your life. Let's dive in. For today's episode, we are going to be talking about dating. And I want to walk you through a scenario. You meet someone, they seem great, you feel instant chemistry, and then almost immediately, you start waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or maybe the opposite happens. You move really fast. You find yourself oversharing. You give too much too soon. And you become the person who's always adjusting or maybe always accommodating and even always trying to be what they need because the thought of them leaving feels unbearable. Or maybe you find that you tend to entertain emotionally unavailable people. People who keep you at a distance, who are inconsistent, and you spend the relationship trying to get them to show up the way you need them to. The key thing that I want you to understand is that the reason why this patterning is happening is because these are wound responses. They're survival strategies that made perfect sense given the childhood that you may have had, but they're sabotaging your adult relationships. And so for today's episode, we are going to be talking about how childhood wounds, specifically emotional neglect and abandonment, show up in your dating life. And more importantly, how to heal them so they stop ruining your relationships. So before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe to the show. So when you grow up without consistent emotional attunement from the people who are supposed to care for you, it teaches you something about love. It teaches you that love is unreliable, that it's unconditional, and that you have to earn it. Emotional neglect is when your emotions weren't validated, when you felt things and nobody acknowledged them, when you hurt and nobody was there, when you needed someone and they weren't available. And in those small moments, you feel the weight of that lack of persistent love in your life. That teaches you that your emotions don't matter, that your needs are too much, and that loving someone means shrinking yourself to fit into the space they're willing to give you. But then there's abandonment. This is the fear that underlies so much of what happens in dating. It's the belief that people will leave, that connection is temporary, that eventually everyone figures out you're not worth staying for. Sometimes abandonment is literal. Someone left. Maybe your mom left and didn't raise you, or maybe your father left and didn't raise you. But it's often relational abandonment as well. It's the message you got that you weren't enough to keep someone engaged. Maybe in your family dynamic, your sibling was favored, that your parent was emotionally checked out, that the people who were supposed to be there for you were somewhere else. And when you carry these wounds into dating, they shape everything: who you choose, how you show up, what you tolerate, and what you're willing to ask for. Now, here's something else that is often overlooked in this conversation. And it's something I want to highlight because we need to talk more about how our sibling relationships also impact our childhood and how we move through the world as adults. It's not just about the relationship we have with our parents. When we talk about healing from childhood trauma, the focus is almost always on the parent-child relationship, how your parents made you feel, whether they were emotionally available, whether they showed you love. But what about your siblings? What about witnessing your sibling get what you couldn't access? Think about the golden child dynamic, for example. Your sibling gets celebrated, they get attention, they get love, they get hugs, they get all this recognition, and it feels as if love comes freely to them. But maybe you were the scapegoat in your family. Maybe you were the person who was always blamed for the family problems or issue that took place. Maybe you were blamed for being a bad influence on your sibling. You were overlooked. You were the one that had to earn things that your sibling just automatically got. That can also shape your worldview. and that leaves a wound. That's not just about your parents' treatment of you. That's about watching your sibling receive something you desperately wanted and couldn't get. That's about believing there's something fundamentally different about you, something worse, something less favorable, something less lovable, because your sibling got what you didn't. These sibling dynamics shape your self-esteem in ways that are often completely invisible. You might not even connect it to your dating patterns, but trust me, it is there. And sometimes it's the voice that says, they're going to realize you're not as worthy as the people they could be with instead. They're going to choose someone else. There's always going to be someone better, someone smarter, someone prettier, someone more fit, more athletic, someone who's more and more and more of something that you feel you are not. It's the belief that you have to prove yourself in ways that other people don't, because you learned early that being yourself just wasn't enough. So how do these wounds show up in your dating life? Because when you're carrying these childhood wounds into dating, they show up in very specific patterns. And recognizing them is the first step to healing them. So let's talk about the people pleaser pattern. This is when you choose someone and immediately become the person who adjusts and accommodates. So you learn their preferences and make them your preferences. You notice what they need and you provide it before they even ask. You manage their emotions. You make sure they're comfortable. You're not doing this consciously, however. You're doing it because you learned that love means accommodation, that your job is to be easy and to make everybody else's life easier. That if you're just accommodating enough, they'll stay. Even if that means sacrificing your own needs and your own desires, you believe that in order to be loved, you have to make sure you are pleasing everyone else, even if you are not pleased in return. And here's what happens. You disappear in that. You lose yourself in that. And eventually, resentment builds because you're giving so much and not receiving a thing. You're not asking for what you need. You're not being assertive in your relationship, but you're also suppressing and shrinking your needs. And the relationship becomes suffocating for the both of you. The other pattern is when we choose unavailable people. So this is when you entertain people who keep you at a distance. Notice that I didn't say attract. I honestly hate that language, the idea that we attract certain people. We attract a whole host of people in our lives. If you really were to take the time to think about every single person that has came into your orbit, think about the people who did like you, but you rejected them for some reason. Think about the people who probably wanted to be your friend, but there was something about them that you did not like, so therefore you're not friends with them. We attract all kinds of people. I truly believe dating and any kind of relationship, honestly, is less about attraction and more about entertainment. It's about what you are willing to entertain. Because there are going to be different people and different personalities that come into your orbit. But who you choose to entertain are the people who get to stay. So, people who are emotionally unavailable, people who are inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, people who make you work for their attention might be people that you are used to. So you entertain it. The reality is you may not know that this person is emotionally unavailable just from looking at them or maybe having one conversation with them. But the more you get to know them, you will start to pick up the signs. And the more you pick those signs up and still make a choice to engage with that person, that is what it means to entertain a dysfunctional dynamic. However, if you experienced a lot of neglect, if you struggle with your self-esteem, and if you've never really had a proper template for what healthy love looks like, you might actually think this is chemistry. You might think this is love. But actually, it's just simply familiarity. It's the same dynamic you had in childhood. Someone you have to chase, someone whose love you have to earn, someone who feels just out of reach. There are people who their parent was this person. So it makes sense that you would entertain a stranger who behaves the same way, because if your own parent made you feel this way, What is the other template? What is the other blueprint for understanding what healthy love looks like? And so when someone feels like home, you'll be more willing to entertain that person. Now let's talk about the self-sabotage pattern. This is when things are going really well. The person is showing up, they're consistent, they're available. And what happens? This makes you panic. As a result, you create distance, you pick a fight, you test them, you do something to prove that they'll leave. So at least you're the one in control of the leaving. Because the anticipation of abandonment feels worse than the abandonment itself. You'd rather confirm your worst fear than sit with the uncertainty. And then you have the other pattern, which is the anxious waiting pattern. You're in a relationship and it's going good. It's pretty similar to self-sabotage, but you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. So it's not that you're doing particular things to sabotage the relationship. Instead, you are just in a chronic state of anxiety about the relationship. So if they're a little distant one day and they take a long time to respond to your text message, you spiral. You assume it's over. You interpret small things as signs that they're losing interest. You're hypervigilant to any shift in their attention because you learned early that love is unstable, that people leave, that connection is fragile and easily broken. But I want you to know that there are ways that you can heal this. But first, we need to understand why these patterns exist, because they're not character flaws in any way. And I think that's important to understand. They are literally survival strategies. They're forms of protection. It's literally how you had to survive. When you grew up not feeling enough for your parents, these patterns protected you. People pleasing kept you from being abandoned if you were useful, if you were easy. Maybe they'd love you more, give you hugs more, acknowledge you more. Choosing unavailable people kept you safe if they couldn't fully reject you because they were never fully available. You couldn't be fully hurt. When you watched your sibling get love you couldn't access, these patterns made sense. If you worked hard enough, if you proved yourself enough, maybe you could earn the love that should have been given to you freely. If you stayed anxious and hypervigilant, maybe you could prevent the abandonment you'd already experienced. But here is the thing. In adulthood, these patterns don't protect you anymore. They sabotage you. They keep you from building the secure, consistent relationships you actually desire. So how do you actually heal these wounds? How do you rewire these patterns so they stop ruining your dating life? Well, let's break this down. First, you need to grieve the love you didn't get. This is a critical step. You need to mourn the childhood you deserved but didn't get. The parent who should have been emotionally available. The sibling dynamics that should have been different. The consistent love that should have been given freely to you. This grief is essential because as long as you're still hoping that the unavailable person will finally show up for you, or that if you just prove yourself enough, someone will finally love you, you're still in the wound. Grief, however, plays a role in closing that chapter. It says, that's not coming, and I need to accept that and move forward. We cannot erase the past. We cannot change people, but we can accept what happened to us and make decisions that will change the course of our future. But grief is a big, big part of doing that. Because even now in adulthood, you might be still trying to get your parents' love and attention. And grieving that relationship is going to be a huge step in you being able to find the love that you actually do deserve. A love that willfully wants you, a love that will show up for you, a love that doesn't expect you to people please or self-sabotage, a love that will teach you security versus anxiety. But for right now, if you're still waiting for that emotionally available parent or your sibling to see you in a certain way or your parent to love you in a certain way, but they've never have, then this is a time where you need to say, I need to accept them for who they are and move forward. The second thing I want you to do is recognize when you're in the wound. Start noticing when you're operating from your childhood wounds, when you're choosing someone because they feel familiar, which means they feel painful, when you're people pleasing instead of being authentic, when you're waiting for someone to leave instead of believing they might stay. That is the wound operating. It's not them, it is your wound. And this awareness plays a huge role in helping you break these patterns because you can't change what you don't see. So it's really important to be able to speak to the wound itself by saying, I'm choosing this because it feels familiar. It's not that that person is doing XYZ. It's me. It's my wound speaking here, and I need to tackle the wound. The next thing you need to do is challenge the belief systems you have. Your wounds created thoughts such as, I'm not good enough. People always leave. I have to earn love. Someone else is always going to be better than me or more lovable than me because of your sibling, maybe. These beliefs might feel true. They feel like facts, but they're not. They're conclusions you drew as a child to try to make sense of your experience. I really want you to try to see your belief systems as simply that. All of us are trying to make sense of life, which is why we have these platitudes like everything happens for a reason or God won't give you more than you can bear. We really struggle with the unknown. So we always are trying to attach a story to something. But notice how the story that you always choose is a negative story. I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not lovable enough. And I can completely understand how your childhood wounds might shape those dynamics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was true. What actually was true was that you grew up in a home with a parent that was emotionally unavailable. That is the fact. The fact is not that you are not a lovable person. The fact is my parent is emotionally immature, emotionally unavailable, emotionally neglectful, and this is how they treated me. You hear the difference in that? There is a huge difference between I'm not enough versus this was this person's behavior toward me. And that behavior has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with them. So you need to start questioning where your beliefs come from. Challenge if they're true. But when it comes to evidence, you really have to ask yourself, do I have any evidence that contradicts this belief? And saying, well, this is what happened to me as a child is actually not evidence. You really have to sit with the experience to say, this is what happened to me, yes, but that doesn't mean I was to blame. That doesn't mean that I am XYZ. It means that this is what was probably happening to my parent. And that is why they favored my sister more or my brother more, because maybe my brother or my sister had a particular quality that my parent liked more. But that doesn't mean something's wrong with me. That has nothing to do with me. So do the work of challenging your beliefs. The next thing you need to do is practice receiving. If you grew up not feeling loved, receiving love feels very uncomfortable. It feels suspicious sometimes. And often it feels like it's too good to be true. So you need to practice. When someone compliments you, say thank you instead of deflecting. Really ask yourself at times too, when someone is trying to be generous and courteous toward you, do you get offended? Ask yourself why. If someone is complimenting me by saying your hair looks beautiful, you seem very handsome, you look really beautiful as a person, oh, I really like your outfit, take the time to ask yourself what the offense is there. Because a lot of time too, we don't realize we are kind of sitting and manufacturing our own suffering by choosing to see everything that happens to us as an attack, as a negative. This person had the audacity to comment on my dress today. Why is that a bad thing? I really, really want you to sit with that and ask yourself, do I have a problem with receiving goodness? Do I take offense with anything, especially coming from a stranger? When people are just simply trying to be courteous, kind, gracious, careful, thoughtful, do I have a problem receiving that? So let it land instead of immediately minimizing it or being offended by it. We need to do the work of retraining our nervous system to recognize that love can be stable and it can be kind and it can be gracious. The next thing I want you to do is choose differently. Once you understand your patterns, you can make different choices. You can notice when you're entertaining someone because they feel familiar, but there's also pain there. And you can pause in that and you can make a different choice. You can also recognize when you're about to people please away your authenticity, and you can choose a different action. This doesn't mean the attraction to certain people goes away immediately because healing isn't linear, but it does mean you have choices. It means that you can do the work of recognizing when you're repeating the same pattern that has existed on autopilot your whole entire life. So, discernment is key in dating. We have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to entertain? And what choices are we going to make to get the things that we say that we want out of life? The next thing is to build secure relationships slowly. As you heal, you might notice that secure, consistent people feel boring at first. There's no drama, no uncertainty, no chase. That's actually a good sign. It means they're different from what you're used to. So give yourself time to adjust. Consistency feels strange when you've learned that love is inconsistent, and availability feels suspicious when you've learned that people are unavailable. But the more you spend time with someone who's actually reliable, the more your nervous system learns that safety is possible. Your childhood wounds are real. The emotional neglect you experienced, the abandonment you felt, the sibling dynamics that shaped your self-esteem, those all matter. They shaped how you see love and how you show up in relationships. But they don't have to run your dating life forever. You can heal them. You can grieve the love you didn't get. You can challenge the beliefs that no longer serve you. You can practice receiving love and kindness, and you can also choose differently. The patterns that protected you as a child are now sabotaging you as an adult, and recognizing that is the beginning of change. So if this episode hit home, please make sure to rate and subscribe to the show. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, All the Hard Things, on Substack, and grab a copy of my book, Owning Our Struggles. Here's what I want you to remember today. Your childhood wounds make sense. They shaped you, but they don't define you. You can heal them. You can grieve what you didn't get. You can challenge the beliefs that no longer serve you. And you can build the kind of relationship where you don't have to earn love, where you're simply loved for being you. Until next time.